all of us experience transportation. Everybody's an expert in transportation, and I'd say that with a chuckle, but it's actually true. Everybody's an expert in what transportation means to them because every one of us knows what our commute is like. Parenting, the older your kids get, is largely a matter of transportation, and you know, people's jobs and opportunities depend on transportation. There's this intimately important thing that affects everybody's life, whether you are professionally involved in transportation or not. And by the way, it's also a life or death issue that that reveals some of the weaknesses in our rationality as human beings. And what I mean by that is there are some areas where we are rightly very attuned to safety. I'll take aviation as an example, where we are rethinking some of our very frameworks for aviation oversight because of an incident where someone could have been hurt or killed, could have been seriously injured or killed with Alaska Airlines. And meanwhile, very little attention is paid to roadway safety, where we're in crisis, finally have things moving in the right direction, but not quickly enough. And where the 1% reduction we saw in roadway deaths last year represents about 2 or 3 airliners full of people who didn't die. And there's no notice to that. So it's a strange thing how we relate to transportation, but everybody experiences it in some ways. And everything from our greatest adventures to our most mundane commutes is at stake in transportation. In terms of the kind of political salience of it, I think the challenge we have is when we get something done and it goes well, almost by design, you're not supposed to have to think about it that much. This is how public works are more generally. When I was mayor, I used to go see our waterworks employees from time to time, and I'd tell them, look, the better job you're doing, the less I'm going to hear it. Nobody's ever going to barge through the doors of the mayor's office demanding to see the boss and say, you know, I just want you to know that I went downstairs today and I turned on the tap in the kitchen and a glass of clean, safe drinking water came out, and it did not poison my family or anything like that, and I just want to have you thank the guys at the waterworks for that civilizational achievement, right? It doesn't work that way. By design, because if you're not worried about drinking water, which should be routine, but as we've seen very cruelly is not always the case in the United States of America, which we're also doing something about in this administration, led by the EPA, then you can think about other things in life. So in some ways we're leaning into trying to get transportation back into the background, actually, by making it not a headache. But when something is unambiguously good, it's also less likely to go viral. And so we have to go out of our way to draw attention to it, which is why we were doing the great event we did yesterday, complete with driving a ceremonial spike. Did you do that? Oh yeah. I don't know what the spike was being driven into, but it was a very nice effect. But honestly, most of the 50,000 projects you mentioned aren't getting that treatment. They're just going to make people better off, and we got to go out of our way to draw attention to it because it is good news.
Let's talk about cars and electrification and charging stations and the attempt to build up that infrastructure. What are the goals by 2025, 2030 to have the automobile industry moving in much more in that direction?
The auto industry is moving in the direction of electric already, which begs the question, why bother with any policies around that? And the reason is there are 3 things that are not guaranteed to happen. 1, will it happen quickly enough to help us meet our climate goals? Mm-hmm. 2, will it be accessible so that this is not just an elite first adopter concern, but that everybody gets the benefit, especially the money you can save if you have one of these things? Yeah. And 3, will this be a made in America electric vehicle revolution? Those 3 questions are very much in play right now, yeah. And they're what's at stake in things like the $7.5 billion we're committing to get chargers built across the country. The president's goal is to have 500,000 chargers out across the country by the end of this decade. That's what we think we'll need to add in order to really serve an EV economy as well.
And I'm sorry, can you tell, like 500,000? That's a huge number, but what does that mean for somebody who's driving? Can you give a picture, for somebody who's driving from Detroit to St. Louis?
Yeah. So it's important to consider the different types of chargers. So we're going to be we're at launching the process of installing a lot of fast chargers across the country. These are the ones that are most similar to the experience of a gas station in a matter of minutes. You can charge your car. Part of the requirement we've set out as we work with the states that are ultimately getting most of these dollars out is you should never go more than 50 miles without coming upon a charger. It's the same way when you go out on a road trip today. You know that there's going to be a gas station somewhere between where you are and where you need to be. Then there's level 2 chargers. They take longer, but they're dramatically easier and less expensive to install. It makes sense to have those at a lot of locations, especially places you might be spending half an hour anyway, a place you're going to stop to eat or shop. And then there's a charging infrastructure that people don't know they already have if they have a single family home and a garage, which is the plug in your wall, which if you have all night, which many people often do for their cars, is adequate, but not when you're out on the road. And that doesn't do you much good if you're in a multifamily dwelling in a city where you don't have a garage or a single family home. That's why we have community charging to try to meet those places that the market can't or won't yet do. And these alternative fuel corridors around the country where we're making sure the states have those chargers. This is new. I mean, this is out of the 50-some new programs created for our department alone out of the president's infrastructure plan. This might be the most novel. And so it means it's been challenging to get those chargers into the ground. We're standing up an entire new multi-billion-dollar program. But we've seen the very first of those chargers actually get into the ground. And we'll see another handful in the coming months, ramping up toward that goal of thousands and thousands being added through the decade, so that there is that confidence that when you set out on a journey in an EV, that you're going to never have to worry any more than we worry about not being able to find gas.
On your third point, just quickly, that competition to be the world leader, I assume, comes from China.
Yes, and it's important to note that the Trump administration allowed China to build a big advantage here. And part of this is being propelled by unfair practices on their part in terms of how they subsidize their OEMs. But part of it's also that because the last administration didn't view it as important for America to win in this regard, didn't make some of the investments that we're now making. Now, the cruel irony of this is that I've seen what it means to allow America to fall behind on that, because I saw what happened when the Studebaker car company fell behind and went out of business 20 years before I was born. But I could tell by the time I was old enough to notice that it was the most important thing that had happened in the city I grew up in, because there were acres and acres of factories that looked as though they had been destroyed in war, that were just part of the scenery when I was going to school or getting around town. That's what happens when you can't innovate and keep up. And that's what's at stake for not just the industrial Midwest, but really whole swaths of America, if we don't make sure that this is a made in America EV revolution.
Let me pick up on something you brought up earlier. Well, Mike expires over here on our way. You okay? You okay?
I'm okay, and I assured everyone I tested negative. But,
okay.
You know,
We're relieved.
something's wrong.
But let me pick up on something else, because a lot of people take these things personally, and that is the aviation safety issue that you brought up. Clearly, something's broken at Boeing, and it has led to the CEO saying he's stepping down, and there have been whistleblower providing testimony that's kind of disturbing. And yet, at the same time, you know, there were a couple of those MAX crashes that did not result in real changes at Boeing, did not result in criminal prosecution of people. Something is deteriorating there, and yet the system doesn't seem to be squeezing them, and the CEO is able to say, well, I'll stick around for a year, and then I'll go. And there's something seems wrong about that, and I'm just wondering what your reaction is.
Yeah, I mean, FAA was very concerned about what they saw when they went out to Boeing, and have taken a step that I don't think has ever been taken before, which is to limit how many planes they can even make until they demonstrate that they can make them safely. And you know, that has consequences, but the consequences are economic, and we just have to live with those, because safety is, everything else is multiplied by zero unless you're taking care of safety. I think it is not just an operational but a cultural problem. And I think that it's going to be necessary for any leadership there to be very responsive to that. Part of what happened was, or I should say part of what didn't happen, was the same kind of scrutiny and attention inside Boeing on the manufacturing side that there was on the design side. So what did come out of everything that happened after the 737 MAX crashes, owing not just to policy leadership, but really the extraordinary activism of families, some of whom I met with and had heartbreaking conversations about the impact on their families of the loss of life, was a lot of change in the evaluation of whether a design is safe. What you have here is a separate thing, which the manufacturer also needs to be able to demonstrate, which is, did the plane that came off the line actually conform to that design? And obviously you're only as safe as the match between what was produced and what was supposed to be produced, which is why we have Boeing under such a microscope and reevaluating FAA's own procedures and approaches. But I do think part of what's at stake here is to maintain an aviation safety record in this country that's extraordinary. That we need to regard not as a destination, but as a process that continually has to be refreshed, while we simultaneously get things like roadway safety and rail safety to be a little more like that very exacting culture that we've established as a country, such that just since this administration arrived, we've had about 3 billion occasions when a passenger has stepped onto an airliner, and every one of them has stepped back off since we got here, that I know of, at least in terms of, I'll put it another way. It's been 15 years now since there was a fatal airliner crash. And our challenge, and I don't just mean the government, the FAA, but the entire aviation sector, is to understand each year what has become the thing that most puts that record at risk, and then go after it.